Heartbroken billionaire hides in office. After divorce, cleaner's nightly tea brings him back to life. Love is just a contract, Richard Hale whispered to the empty office. His voice cracked his tie, loosened his glass of whiskey untouched. The city skyline glittered beyond the window, mocking him with its cold lights. Days ago, he had signed papers that ended a 10-year marriage, and with it, the last piece of his heart. Now the billionaire CEO who once commanded empires hid in his office like a ghost. No calls, no boardrooms, no friends, just silence. Until one night the silence was broken, not by investors or lawyers, but by the quiet clink of the empty signature. The pen didn't just scratch the paper, it carved into Richard Hale's chest. The ink was dry before his hands stopped shaking. The divorce papers lay between him and the lawyer, simple words ending a decade-long marriage. Outside cameras flashed. The billionaire CEO of Hale Enterprises was news no matter what he did. But this was scandal dressed as tragedy. "Mr. Hale, if you'll confirm," the lawyer said. Richard nodded. His throat burned. Confirming was all he could do. The silence after. At first he thought he'd feel freedom, relief, anything. Instead, silence crushed him. No messages from Emily, no calls from friends. Even the company once his refuge turned cold. He avoided the penthouse. The marble floors, the empty dining table, the untouched piano, they screamed of her absence. So he hid in his office. Floor 47, curtains drawn, bottles stacked. The billionaire who once planned mergers until sunrise now sat in the dark, staring at a skyline that glittered like 1,000 cruel eyes. The whispers. His staff noticed. The CEO's footsteps grew rarer. Meetings postponed, emails unanswered, rumors spread. "He's finished. She took half of everything. He doesn't care about the company anymore." Richard heard them. He let them burn. Better whispers than pity. The breaking point. On the fourth night alone, Richard leaned back in his chair, tie-loose whiskey untouched. The city's neon bled through the blinds, casting sharp stripes across his face. "Love is just a contract," he whispered. His voice cracked on the word love. He pressed his palms into his eyes until stars burst. He wanted to sleep, to forget. Instead, the silence thickened, smothering. Then came a sound he hadn't expected, soft, steady footsteps. Not investors, not board members. Too quiet, too hesitant. The door creaked. A figure slipped in. The stranger in the shadows. Maria Alvarez, night cleaner. Mid-40s, hair tied back, uniform, simple eyes tired yet steady. She had seen him from afar for months, dusting corners, while he gave speeches, wiping floors, while he stormed through hallways. Now she saw something else, a man crumbling. She didn't speak. She didn't pity. She simply set a small porcelain cup on his desk. Steam curled upward, fragrant, unfamiliar. Richard blinked. "What is this?" T. Maria said softly. Her accent rounded the word. "You look like you need it." He almost laughed, almost shouted. But instead, for reasons he couldn't name, he wrapped his hands around the warmth. It was the first human kindness he had felt in weeks. And it came not from boardrooms or investors, but from the woman who swept his floors. The nightly tea ritual begins. The second night. Richard thought it was a fluke, some misplaced act of pity. Yet when the clock struck midnight the next evening, the door creaked again. And there it was, the same porcelain cup, steam curling, placed silently beside his untouched whiskey. Maria didn't speak. She simply wiped the edges of his desk, eyes lowered, before moving on to the windows. Richard stared at the tea. "You again," he muttered. Maria paused. "I clean every night, Mr. Hale. You just never noticed. The words hit harder than they should. He hadn't noticed. Not her, not anyone outside his orbit of power and money. Until now. He lifted the cup, sipped cautiously. The warmth spread through his chest, softer than whiskey, gentler than silence. A rhythm forms. Night after night, the pattern repeated. Midnight. Footsteps. Tea. Silence. Maria never asked questions. She didn't pry about the divorce, the headlines, the fact that the mighty Richard Hale now lived in his office. Instead, she talked about small things. The city smells different after rain. They fixed the elevator on the west side finally. My daughter's exams went well this week. Ordinary words, human words. They grounded him in ways stock reports never could. And Richard, to his own surprise, found himself answering. Yes, the rain reminds me of summers in Boston. That elevator was broken for months. Your daughter, what does she want to study? Conversations stitch themselves together, slowly, carefully, like someone mending torn fabric. The staff whispers again. Employees began to notice. The janitor stayed longer in the CEO's office. The CEO's light stayed on later, but his whiskey bottles gathered dust. His face looked less hollow in the mornings. Strange, someone whispered. He talks to her. Another replied. What could a billionaire and a cleaner have to talk about? The barrier of pride. One night, Richard broke the silence between sips of tea. Why do you do this? He asked. Maria didn't stop wiping the shelves. Because you looked like a man drowning. And everyone else was too afraid to throw a rope. He scoffed. I don't need saving. Maria met his eyes for the first time. Everyone needs saving sometimes, even the rich. The words unsettled him, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. The ritual deepens. By the 10th night, the ritual was no longer habit, it was anchor. Richard found himself waiting for the sound of the door, for the warmth of porcelain in his hands. The silence of his office no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a pause between their conversations. And though he wouldn't admit it aloud, Richard realized something terrifying. For the first time since Emily left, he wanted to live again. And it had nothing to do with money. Cracks in the armor. The confession begins. On the 13th night, Richard broke his own rule. The tea was warm in his hands. Maria's quiet hum filled the office as she dusted shelves, and suddenly the word slipped out. She left because of me. Maria didn't pause, didn't gasp. She simply asked, because of what? Richard stared into the steam. Because I love the company more than her. 10 years of marriage, and I missed anniversaries, dinners, birthdays. I told myself it was for us. Truth is, it was for me. The words felt foreign in his mouth. Admissions were weakness in his world. Yet Maria didn't judge. She only placed a fresh napkin on his desk and said, At least you know the truth now. That matters. The scar beneath the suit. For the first time, Richard noticed Maria's hands, rough, calloused, cracked from years of cleaning chemicals. Not delicate, not pampered. They spoke of labor of sacrifice. Do you have regrets? He asked suddenly. Maria gave a small smile. Plenty. But regret doesn't feed my daughter. So I keep moving. Her simplicity disarmed him. In his world, regrets were polished into memoirs masked with PR. Maria carried hers like invisible scars, quiet, heavy, but never defining. The unexpected laughter. One night, Maria told him about a broken vacuum cleaner that made a sound like a dying cow. Richard laughed, a sharp, startled sound that startled him most of all. Maria chuckled too. It's good to hear that. Laughter suits you better than silence. Richard shook his head, almost embarrassed. I'd forgotten how. Then practice, Maria said, pouring him more tea. The shift in the air. As days turned to weeks, something shifted. Richard's staff noticed him walking the halls again, sleeves rolled, voice steadier. He attended meetings not with fire but with presence. But the true transformation happened at midnight, in the presence of a woman who saw him not as a billionaire, not as a failure, but as a man learning how to live again. The photo. One evening, while clearing papers, Maria's eyes landed on a photo frame face down on the shelf. She hesitated, then gently lifted it. Emily's smile, a younger Richard beside her. Happiness frozen in time. Maria set it back down careful. She was beautiful. Richard's throat tightened. She still is, just not mine anymore. For a moment, the pain threatened to swallow him again. But Maria's calm steadied him. She was part of your story, Maria said softly, but not the end of it. The words lingered a lifeline in the dark, a dangerous thought. That night, as Maria left, Richard caught himself watching the door longer than usual. Not for the tea, not for the ritual. For her, the thought unsettled him. She was a cleaner. The rumors begin. The whispers spread. It started with a secretary noticing, then a junior executive. Soon the entire floor buzzed with the same question. Why does the CEO meet with the night cleaner every night? The stories multiplied, each more twisted than the last. Some whispered that Richard had lost his mind after the divorce, clinging to the only person who would listen. Others, nastier, suggested Maria was using him, scheming her way into power. No one knew the truth. But in the sharp world of Hale Enterprises, perception mattered more than fact. The confrontation. One morning, Avery, Richard's chief of staff, cornered him outside the boardroom. "Richard," she said carefully, "I need to ask. These late nights with the cleaner." Richard's eyes hardened. "Her name is Maria." Avery didn't flinch. "People are talking. Investors listen to whispers. You can't afford—" "I don't care about whispers," Richard snapped. His voice echoed through the hall. For the first time in months, it carried the steel of the man who once commanded empires. But beneath that anger, his chest tightened. Did he care more than he wanted to admit? Maria feels the weight. That night, Maria placed the tea on his desk, but her hands lingered. "I think maybe I shouldn't come anymore," she said quietly. Richard froze. "Why?" "People talk. About you. About me. I don't want to bring shame on your name or mine." Her eyes held no fear, only dignity. She wasn't ashamed of herself, but she refused to be painted as something she wasn't. Richard's jaw clenched. "Do you think I care what they say?" Maria met his gaze. "You should. You're a man with everything to lose. I'm just a woman trying to survive." The silence between them pulsed heavy and raw. The unexpected defense. Days later, a shareholder slyly joked during a meeting, "Careful, Hale. Don't let the maid run your empire." The room chuckled. Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Say her name." The laughter died. The shareholder stammered. "Her name," Richard repeated, voice low and cold, "is Maria Alvarez. And if any of you think mocking decency is acceptable in my company, consider this your last meeting." The silence afterward was deafening. But Maria never heard about the incident. Richard never told her. The truth beneath. That night, Richard studied her as she poured his tea. The gentle patience, the quiet strength, the way she never asked for anything. How could he explain that her presence was worth more than board approval? He didn't say it aloud, not yet. But as the steam curled upward, he realized the truth he'd been avoiding. He wasn't drinking tea, he was drinking hope. The breaking point. The headline. It was inevitable. One morning, Richard arrived at the office to find a newspaper spread across the conference table. His photo filled the front page. "Heartbroken CEO finds comfort in janitor's arms." The article dripped with poison-grainy photos of Maria carrying her cleaning cart into his office. At midnight, twisted captions suggesting an affair, mocking his fall from grace. By noon, the story had spread across every financial blog and gossip channel. Hale Enterprises stock wavered. Calls flooded in. Investors demanded answers. Maria's shame. That night, Maria's steps were slower. Her uniform neat as always, but her face pale. She didn't carry tea. Richard stood when he saw her. "Where's the cup?" Her voice cracked. "Do you know what my daughter read today at school, that her mother is your mistress?" Richard's stomach clenched. "Maria, I came here to work, Mr. Hale. To clean floors, not to be dragged into your pain and turned into a headline." Her eyes shone with restrained tears. "I can't do this anymore." The outburst. Richard's hand slammed onto the desk. "You think I care what they write? You think I'd let them define you like that?" Maria shook her head. "It doesn't matter what you believe. It matters what the world believes. I have a daughter to protect." The silence that followed was heavier than any rumor. The company cracks. The board convened an emergency session. Words like scandal, distraction, liability echoed through the room. One director leaned forward. "Richard, for the sake of the company, distance yourself. Fire her. End this." Richard's jaw tightened. Fire her, reduce. Maria Alvarez, the woman who had held his broken soul together, to a footnote in his downfall. "No," he said, voice steel. "She stays." The board erupted. Investors threatened to pull support. Richard's empire trembled. But his mind was clear. The private plea. That night he found Maria in the supply closet, boxing her things. "Don't go," he said. His voice, once commanding, was now almost pleading. Maria looked at him, weary but firm. "You're a billionaire, Richard. You can survive without tea. I can't survive with my daughter's name in the dirt." Richard stepped closer. "This isn't about tea. It's about the only reason I didn't give up. About the nights I didn't drown, because you were there." Her hands trembled around the box. "Please," he whispered, "don't leave me now." The breaking point. Maria closed her eyes. When she opened them, her voice was steady. "Then you must make a choice, Mr. Hale. Either you fight for both of us in the light, or you let me walk away into the dark. But I will not live halfway in your shadows." The words split him open. For the first time, Richard realized this wasn't just about survival. It was about dignity. And dignity demanded sacrifice. The stand. The boardroom ultimatum. The following week, the board assembled once more, faces stiff with disapproval. Reports lay stacked, falling shares, jittery investors' headlines, dripping with scandal. The chairman leaned forward. "Richard, this company cannot survive your distractions. Maria Alvarez must be dismissed, publicly, today." All eyes turned to him. The billionaire who once moved markets now sat at the edge of ruin. Richard inhaled slow, steady. Then he pushed the papers aside. "No." The room froze. "I built Hale Enterprises on integrity," Richard continued. "And I will not betray that by discarding the one person who showed me more loyalty than any of you sitting here." A director slammed his palm on the table. "This isn't about loyalty. This is about perception." Richard's voice cut sharp. "Perception won't save this company, but truth will." The press conference. That evening, Richard stood before a wall of cameras. Maria, hesitant, stood just behind him. The room buzzed, hungry for blood. He adjusted the microphone. His hands didn't shake. "Yes," he said, voice steady. "Maria Alvarez has been in my office every night, not as a lover, not as a scandal, but as the only human being who saw me as more than a headline." The reporters murmured, cameras clicking furiously. When my marriage ended, when I nearly lost myself, she was there. With nothing but a cup of tea. She asked for nothing in return. And if that offends investors or threatens stock prices, then let it. Because I'd rather lose money than lose my soul. The room erupted. Questions flew. But Richard didn't wait for them. He took Maria's hand just briefly and led her off stage. The fallout. By morning, half the media mocked him. CEO falls for cleaner. The other half praised his candor. Hale chooses integrity over image. The stock dipped, then steadied. Investors, though furious, couldn't ignore the flood of public support. Employees rallied, whispering of the boss, who finally bled like them. Richard didn't care about numbers. For once, his world wasn't measured in dollars. Maria's reckoning. That night, Maria confronted him in the office. "Why did you do that? You risked everything." Richard looked at her, weary but resolute. "Because you were right. I can't live halfway in shadows. Not anymore." Her eyes softened, but her voice held firm. "This doesn't mean I belong in your world, Richard. I'm still just me." He nodded. "And that's exactly why I need you there." The silence stretched fragile and warm. For the first time, Maria didn't pull away. The turn. The nightly ritual resumed, not in secret, but in defiance. Tea on the desk. Conversations in the quiet. But now, the world knew. And Richard Hale, once a broken billionaire, now a man standing bare, felt something return that money had never bought. Respect. For her. For himself. For the healing. The quiet mornings. For the first time in years, Richard arrived at the office before dawn, not to bury himself in contracts, but to breathe. The city skyline, once a taunt of emptiness, now shimmered with possibility. Maria's tea still waited on his desk at midnight, but something had changed. Their conversations drifted beyond loss and loneliness. "Do you ever miss teaching?" she asked one night. Richard blinked. "Teaching," Maria smiled. "You explain things, the way you break down problems. I think you would have been a good professor." The thought startled him. Richard Hale, professor. Yet for the first time, he didn't dismiss it. He laughed softly. Maybe one day. The shift in the company. Inside Hale Enterprises, the mood changed. Richard's candor had unnerved the board, but inspired the staff. He walked the halls, more asked names, remembered birthdays. The man once feared as untouchable was now strangely human. When one intern nervously spilled coffee on him during a presentation, Richard only chuckled. "Don't worry, I've survived worse spills." The room laughed, tension broken. His empire hadn't collapsed. It had adapted, just like him. Maria's world. Richard began noticing Maria outside the office, too. He saw the way she carried groceries for an elderly neighbor, the way she clapped the loudest at her daughter's school recital, the way her laugh filled even the smallest spaces. One Saturday, he surprised her with something simple, a new set of textbooks for her daughter. Not wrapped in wealth, just tied with ribbon. Maria's eyes watered. "Why would you?" "Because someone once gave me hope when I didn't deserve it," Richard said. "Now it's my turn." The scar and the stitch. One night, Richard pulled the old photo of Emily from the shelf. This time, he didn't hide it. He set it on the desk between them. Maria looked at it quietly. "You loved her deeply." "Yes," Richard admitted. "And I let that love drown in ambition. I can't change that. But I can choose differently now." Maria's hand brushed the edge of the frame, then withdrew. "Scars don't vanish, Richard. But sometimes they remind us we survived." Her words settled into him like a stitch pulling two broken edges together. The man in the mirror. Weeks later, Richard stood before the mirror in his penthouse. The same man stared back, broad shoulders, tailored suit, the face that once filled magazines. But behind the eyes was something new. Not just a billionaire, not just a divorcee. A man who had fallen, shattered, and begun to heal. The unspoken truth. Each night, as Maria poured his tea, there lingered an unspoken weight between them. Gratitude, respect, perhaps something more. Neither dared name it yet, but Richard knew one truth with absolute clarity. Maria had not just saved him. She had taught him to live again. And living for the first time felt richer than any empire he had ever built. The new beginning, the invitation. Spring arrived quietly. The office, once Richard's prison, now buzzed with new energy. On a Friday evening, Richard appeared at the maintenance floor, startling the staff. He wasn't in his usual sharp suit, just a plain shirt sleeves rolled, carrying 2 paper cups of tea. Maria looked up from her cart. "You shouldn't be here." Richard smiled faintly. "For months you've come to me with tea. Tonight I thought I'd come to you." Her co-workers exchanged stunned glances as the billionaire CEO leaned against a mop bucket like it was the most natural place in the world. The daughter's eyes. The following week, Maria hesitated, but finally allowed Richard to meet her daughter, Sophia. 14, sharp-eyed, cautious. She studied him across the kitchen table. "You're the man from the newspapers," she said flatly. Richard chuckled. "I've been called worse." Sophia didn't laugh. "Are you going to hurt my mom?" The question sliced through him. He looked directly into the girl's eyes. "No. Your mom saved me when I was at my weakest. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever hurts her again." For the first time, Sophia's guarded expression softened. The choice. Months passed. Rumors quieted. The company stabilized. And Richard, once consumed by boardrooms, began carving space for something he had never prioritized before life outside work. One night, standing in his office with Maria's tea in hand, he turned to her. "I used to think this desk was my world," he said. "Now I know it's just furniture. You're the reason I didn't let go." Maria shook her head. "I didn't rescue you, Richard. You rescued yourself. I only reminded you that you still had a heart." Her words broke something open inside him, not weakness, but clarity. The new beginning. On the anniversary of his divorce, Richard didn't lock himself in the office. Instead, he invited Maria and Sophia to the penthouse. The piano no longer sat untouched. Sophia tapped at the keys, while Maria laughed softly at her mistakes. Richard poured tea, not whiskey. For the first time in years, the penthouse felt alive. As the night settled, Richard looked around the room. He saw no headlines, no scandals, no empty wealth. Only warmth. Only possibility. And in Maria's steady gaze, he saw something he had thought was gone forever home. The last sip. Richard lifted his cup, steam curling toward the ceiling. Strange, isn't it? How everything changed because of tea. Maria smiled, eyes shining. "Not tea, Richard. Kindness." The room fell quiet, but it was no longer the silence of loss. It was the silence of a life reborn. For the first time since his fall, Richard Hale knew this was not the